The alien princess denied all suitors, then pointed at a silent human. Part 5. The Human Way. The attack came on the second night. Darwin had spent the day learning the customs of the bonding ceremony from a palace official who spoke to him the way one might speak to a child. He did not mind. He listened, asked questions when something was unclear, and took notes in his small notebook. The official seemed surprised that a human could write at all. By evening, the 2 guards outside his door had been replaced. The new guards wore the same armor and carried the same weapons, but something about them was different. They stood a little too stiffly. They avoided meeting his eyes when he greeted them. Darwin noticed. He always noticed. That was the thing about being invisible for most of your life. You learned to see things that other people missed because no one ever watched you watching them. Instead, he sat at the small desk in his quarters and opened the one piece of equipment he had brought from the Earth Embassy. A standard-issue diplomatic broadcast device. It was nothing special. Every embassy worker carried one. It was designed to send live audio and video feeds to all registered diplomatic channels in case of an emergency. It was a safety tool, a last resort, a small box with a single red button that most translators never pressed in their entire careers. Darwin placed it on the desk and waited. The door opened at exactly midnight. 3 figures slipped into the room. They moved with the practiced silence of trained killers, fast, precise, and deadly. 2 of them were Keth soldiers, tall and armored in the same light-absorbing black metal that Hyunsik wore. The third was a Valari palace guard, the inside man that Hyunsik had mentioned. He had disabled the lock and turned off the corridor surveillance. They expected to find a sleeping human, an easy target, a soft, fragile creature from a weak planet that could be silenced without noise or struggle. Instead, they found Darwin sitting calmly at his desk, facing the door, with the broadcast device already active. The red light on the device blinked steadily. It had been transmitting for the past 30 minutes, sending a live feed to every diplomatic channel in the Valari system. Every embassy, every news station, every government office on every ship and station within range was now watching. The assassins froze. "Good evening," Darwin said. His voice was steady, as if he were greeting colleagues at a meeting. "I want you to know that this conversation is being broadcast live to 412 registered diplomatic channels, including the Valari Imperial Court, the Galactic Council of Neutral Systems, and the Earth Planetary Defense Network." The Keth soldiers looked at each other. The Valari guard's face went pale. Darwin continued, still sitting, still calm. "If you kill me now, you will do so in front of every government in the known galaxy. The Valari Empire will be forced to investigate. Prince Hyunsik's involvement will be exposed within hours. The Keth Dominion will face sanctions, trade blocks, and possible military response from at least 14 allied systems. Earth, despite being a minor species, has mutual defense agreements with the Tessic Union, the Horan Federation, and the Free Worlds Alliance. Those agreements have automatic trigger clauses." He paused and looked at each of them in turn. "You were sent here to solve a problem, but killing me will not solve it. It will create 100 new ones, and every single one of them will trace back to the people who send you." The room was silent, except for the soft blinking of the red light. The Keth soldiers were trained for many things: combat, infiltration, assassination, but they were not trained for this. They were not trained for a target who did not run, did not fight, did not beg, and instead calmly explained exactly why killing him would be the worst decision of their lives. The Valari guard broke first. He stepped backward toward the door, shaking his head. "This is over," he whispered. "I will not be part of this." One of the Keth soldiers reached for his weapon, not to attack, but out of habit, out of confusion, out of the desperate need to do something in a situation he did not understand. Darwin did not flinch. "I would advise against that," he said gently. 412 channels. The soldier's hand stopped. Slowly, he lowered it to his side. Darwin stood up. He was shorter than all three of them. He was weaker than all three of them. He had no weapon, no armor, no power of any kind. But in that moment, standing in the soft blue glow of the crystal walls, with a small red light blinking behind him, he was untouchable. "Leave your weapons on the floor," he said. "Walk out of this room. Go back to whoever sent you and tell them what happened here tonight. Tell them that the human did not fight, did not run, and did not die. Tell them that everything they planned is now recorded, archived, and stored in diplomatic servers across the galaxy where it can never be erased." One by one, the assassins placed their weapons on the floor. One by one, they walked out of the room. Darwin sat back down. He pressed a second button on the broadcast device, a beacon that signaled the royal guards. Then he picked up his notebook and began writing a report on what had just happened, because that was his job, and he intended to do it properly. The royal guards arrived within minutes. Behind them came Lady Sujin, her face tight with fury and concern. Behind her came Emperor Teho, flanked by his personal security. And behind all of them, pushing past guards and advisors without caring about ceremony or protocol, came Yuna. She stopped in the doorway of his room. Her eyes swept over the weapons on the floor, the blinking broadcast device, and Darwin sitting at his desk with his pen in his hand. "You are alive," she said. "Yes," Darwin replied. "They came to kill you." "Yes, and you stopped them with a box and your voice." Darwin looked at the broadcast device. "It is standard embassy equipment. Every translator carries one." She walked past the weapons, past the guards, past her father and his advisors, until she stood directly in front of Darwin. She was taller than him. Her silver skin glowed faintly in the dim light, and her eyes, those pale, ancient, beautiful eyes, were filled with something fierce and bright. "You had no army," she said, "no weapons, no power, and you survived." "That is what humans do," Darwin said quietly. "We survive, not because we are the strongest, or the fastest, or the smartest, but because we pay attention, we think ahead, and we refuse to be afraid of people who expect us to be." Yuna reached down and took his hand. Her skin was cool against his, smooth and faintly luminous, and when her fingers closed around his, Darwin felt something pass between them. Not electricity, not magic, but something quieter and more lasting. Understanding. The feeling of being truly seen by another living being for the first time. Behind them, Emperor Teho watched in silence. The anger was gone from his face. In its place was something complicated, not approval, not yet, but the beginning of respect. The kind of respect that is not given freely, but earned by those who stand still when the world tells them to run. The bonding ceremony took place the next morning. It was smaller than anyone expected. Yuna had insisted. No grand hall, no cameras, no trillion watching eyes, just a garden floating above the palace grounds, a circle of silver flowers, and two people standing face to face under 3 moons. Darwin wore his gray embassy uniform because it was the only thing he owned. Yuna wore her simple white dress. Lady Sujin stood as witness. Emperor Teho stood at the edge of the garden, watching but not speaking, his arms folded across his chest. The ancient words were spoken. The bond was sealed. And across the galaxy, in newsrooms and war chambers and royal courts and tiny apartments on minor planets, the story spread. The story of a princess who rejected every powerful suitor in the known universe, and chose a quiet human translator who carried nothing but a notebook, a pen, and a small red box. They called it many things: a scandal, a miracle, a mistake, a revolution. But Darwin and Yuna called it something simpler. They called it a beginning. And in the years that followed, years of challenges, political storms, and a galaxy that slowly, reluctantly began to change, it was the quiet human who stood beside the Valari princess and proved something that no weapon or army ever could. That the strongest force in the universe is not power. It is the courage to be still when everything around you is screaming. It is the patience to listen when no one else will. It is the simple, stubborn, deeply human refusal to become what the world expects you to be. And that, in the end, is what made humanity worth noticing. The alien princess denied all suitors, then pointed at a silent human. Part 4. The Weight of Silence. The hours after the selection were the most dangerous hours of Darwin's life, and he didn't even realize it at first. He was taken from the Great Hall by a group of royal guards, and led through a series of corridors he had never seen before. The walls here were not crystal, but solid stone, ancient, cold, and thick enough to block any signal or weapon. This was the inner palace, the part that no outsider had ever entered. They brought him to a small, plain room with a single chair, a table, and no windows. 2 guards stood at the door. They did not speak to him. They did not look at him. They simply stood there like statues carved from iron. Darwin sat down in the chair and folded his hands on the table. He waited. It was one of the few things humans were known for in the galaxy, though most alien species meant it as an insult. Humans were slow. Humans were patient. Humans sat and waited while faster, stronger, smarter species made decisions and shaped the universe around them. But Darwin had learned a long time ago that patience was not weakness. Patience was a kind of strength that most beings never understood, because they never had to use it. After 2 hours, the door opened. Emperor Tejo walked in alone. He was taller than Darwin had expected. In the Great Hall, sitting on his throne, Tejo had seemed powerful, but distant. Up close, he was something else entirely. His presence filled the room like pressure, like gravity, like the weight of 300 star systems pressing down on Darwin's shoulders. His glowing eyes, the same silver as Yuna's, but colder, harder, studied Darwin the way a scientist might study a strange insect. He did not sit down. He stood on the other side of the table and looked down at the human. "Tell me," Tejo said, "what you offered my daughter." Darwin met his gaze. "Nothing, Emperor. I offered her nothing." "Then what did you promise her?" "Nothing." "What did you say to her to make her choose you?" "She came to my table yesterday and asked me a few questions. I answered them honestly. That is all." Tejo's eyes narrowed. "You expect me to believe that my daughter, the heir to the Valari Empire, the most sought-after being in the galaxy, chose a human translator who offered nothing, promised nothing, and said almost nothing?" "Yes," Darwin said simply, "because that is what happened." The Emperor stared at him for a long time. The silence in the room was so heavy that Darwin could hear the blood moving through his own veins. "You understand what this means," Tejo said at last. "The bonding ceremony is a sacred tradition. It cannot be undone. If you go through with this, you will be bound to my daughter and to this empire for the rest of your life. You will leave your planet, your people, your world behind. You will live among beings who are stronger, faster, and older than your entire species. Most of them will hate you." He paused. "Many of them will try to kill you." Darwin nodded slowly. "I understand." "Do you? Because I need to know, human. Do you have any idea what you are?" Darwin was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I am a translator. I listen to what people say, and I try to find the truth underneath the words. That is all I have ever been." That is not enough to stand beside a princess. With respect, Emperor, I don't think that is your decision, and I don't think it is mine either. Your daughter made her choice. The only question now is whether you will honor the laws you asked her to follow. The room went very still. For a moment, Dawan thought the Emperor might strike him. Taeho's hand twitched at his side, and the air between them seemed to vibrate with something dangerous and barely controlled. Then, slowly, Taeho exhaled. The tension left his body like air leaving a balloon. "My daughter said something to me last night," the Emperor said quietly. "She said that in a room full of people who wanted to own her, you were the only one who treated her like she was free." He paused. "I did not understand what she meant. I still do not. But I have ruled this empire for 60 years, and I have learned to recognize when someone is telling the truth." He turned and walked to the door. Before he left, he looked back over his shoulder. "The bonding ceremony is in 3 days. You will be given quarters in the inner palace. My guards will protect you. You will need the protection." Then he was gone. Dawan sat alone in the small room for a long time after that. He thought about Earth. He thought about his small apartment near the embassy, the coffee shop he visited every morning, the sound of rain on his window at night. He thought about the life he was about to leave behind, a quiet, ordinary, invisible life that no one in the galaxy had ever noticed or cared about. And then he thought about the way Yuna had smiled when he told her he was just doing his job. He thought about the warmth in her eyes when she asked him if he accepted. He thought about the courage it must have taken for her to point at him in front of the entire galaxy, knowing what it would cost her. He realized something then. Yuna had not chosen him because he was strong, or powerful, or special. She had chosen him because he was the only one who had seen her without wanting something in return. In a universe full of people who looked at her and saw a prize, he had looked at her and seen a person. And that, somehow, was enough. Meanwhile, in the darker parts of the palace, Prince Hyunsik was not sitting quietly. He had gathered 3 of the other rejected suitors in a private chamber far from the eyes of the royal guards. The room was shielded from surveillance, and the walls were lined with a material that absorbed sound. Hyunsik stood at the center, his violet eyes burning with cold fury. "This is not over," he said. "The bonding ceremony is in 3 days. If the human does not survive until then, the selection must be reopened. Those are the ancient laws." One of the suitors, a broad-shouldered general from the Merrick Confederacy, shook his head. "The palace guards are protecting him. Taeho himself ordered it. Guards can be moved. Doors can be opened. Accidents can happen." Hyunsik's voice was calm, but there was something beneath it, something sharp and dangerous, like a blade wrapped in silk. "I have people inside the palace, people who owe me debts they cannot repay. The human will be alone at some point, and when he is—" He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. The others exchanged looks. One by one, they nodded. 3 days. That was all the time Dawan had, and he did not even know the clock was ticking. That night, Dawan lay in his new quarters, a room far grander than anything he had ever lived in, and stared at the ceiling. The crystals above him glowed a soft, gentle blue, and the air smelled of flowers he could not name. He closed his eyes and thought about something his mother had told him when he was young, back on Earth, in a small town that no one in the galaxy would ever hear of. "The loudest people in the room," she had said, "are usually the most afraid. The quiet ones are the ones paying attention." He had paid attention his whole life. Now the whole galaxy was paying attention to him. He rolled over, pulled the strange alien blanket around his shoulders, and did something that would have shocked every powerful being in the Valari Empire. He fell asleep. Not because he wasn't afraid. He was. But Dawan had learned long ago that fear and sleep were not enemies. You could hold both in your hands at the same time, and the world would still be there in the morning. H1. The alien princess denied all suitors, then pointed at a silent human. H2, Part 3. The Pointed Finger. H2. The final day of the selection arrived like a storm. Every seat in the Great Hall was filled. Every balcony was packed. Screens had been set up in the city below so that billions of Valari citizens could watch the event live. Across the galaxy, news channels from 1,000 different worlds were broadcasting the selection. The story had become famous, the princess who said no to everyone. Entire planets had placed bets on who she would finally choose. The remaining suitors stood in a perfect line down the center of the hall. They were the best of the best, the ones who had survived every round of rejection and still believed they had a chance. There were 12 of them. Each one represented a powerful empire, a great military force, or an ancient noble bloodline. At the front of the line stood Prince Hyunsik of the Keth Dominion. Hyunsik was, by any standard, impressive. He was tall, even for his species, with sharp features and deep violet eyes that seemed to glow with their own light. His armor was made of a rare black metal that absorbed light instead of reflecting it, making him look like a walking shadow. He came from one of the oldest and most feared military families in the galaxy. His fleet alone was larger than most nations. He had not spoken much during the selection. He didn't need to. His reputation spoke for him. Everyone in the hall, including Emperor Teho, believed that if Yuna chose anyone, it would be him. Hyunsik believed it too. The Emperor stood, and the hall fell silent. The crystals on the walls turned a deep royal purple, the color of ceremony and decision. "Today my daughter will choose," Teho said. His voice carried through the hall without effort. "The one she selects will be bound to her by the ancient laws of our people. This bond cannot be broken. It is eternal." He turned to Yuna. "Daughter, the galaxy waits." Yuna rose from her throne. She was dressed differently today. Instead of the flowing silver gown she had worn before, she wore a simple white dress with no decoration. Her hair was loose around her shoulders. She wore no crown, no jewels, no symbols of power. She looked for the first time in the entire selection like an ordinary person. The hall held its breath. Yuna stepped down from the raised platform and walked toward the line of suitors. Her footsteps echoed in the silence. The crystals on the walls pulsed slowly, matching the rhythm of her steps. She stopped in front of the first suitor, a massive warrior from the outer rim. She looked at him for 3 seconds, then moved on. She stopped in front of the second, a wealthy merchant prince who controlled half the trade routes in the Western Spiral. She looked at him for 2 seconds, then moved on. One by one, she walked down the line. She looked at each suitor, and each suitor looked back at her with desperate hope in their eyes. Some tried to speak, to make a final plea, but she silenced them with a raised hand. When she reached Hyunsik, she stopped longer than she had for the others. He met her gaze with confidence. A faint smile appeared on his lips. He gave a small, respectful nod, as if the decision had already been made. Then she turned away. Hyunsik's smile vanished. Yuna walked past the last suitor and continued until she reached the end of the line. She stood there, facing the far wall, her back to everyone. The hall was so quiet that people could hear their own heartbeats. Slowly, Yuna turned around. She faced the entire hall, the suitors, the emperor, the ambassadors, the guards, the billions watching on screens across the galaxy. She raised her right hand and pointed. Not at the suitors, not at anyone in the line. She pointed past them, over their heads, across the full length of the Great Hall, to the far corner where the minor species observers sat. She pointed directly at Dowen. For 1 full second, nothing happened. The hall was frozen. Then the noise came. It came all at once, like an explosion. Suitors shouted in disbelief. Ambassadors jumped to their feet. Several warlords drew weapons before the guards could stop them. Hyunsik's face twisted with a fury so intense that the air around him seemed to grow darker. The crystals on the walls turned a chaotic mix of colors: red, orange, white, black, as if the palace itself was in shock. "A human?" someone screamed. "This is an insult. She has lost her mind." Emperor Taeho gripped the arms of his throne so hard that the crystal cracked beneath his fingers. His face was pale. He stared at his daughter as if he had never seen her before. "Yuna," he said, his voice barely controlled, "what is the meaning of this?" Yuna lowered her hand. Her expression was calm. The chaos around her seemed to pass through her, like wind through glass. "I have made my choice," she said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through every other sound in the hall. "According to the ancient laws that you yourself invoked, Father, my choice is final and eternal. I choose the human." Guards moved in to form a barrier around the throne. Hyunsik took a step forward, his hand on his weapon, but two royal guards blocked his path. In the far corner of the hall, Dawin sat perfectly still. His notebook was open, his pen was in his hand, but he was not writing. He was staring at the princess, and she was staring back at him. Across the vast, screaming, furious hall, the two of them looked at each other in complete silence. The lizard diplomat beside him was pulling at his arm, hissing, "Do you understand what just happened? She chose you." Dawin understood. That was the problem. He understood perfectly, and he had no idea what to do with it. He was a translator. He wrote reports. He was nobody from a small planet that most of the galaxy considered barely worth noticing. And the most powerful princess in the known universe had just pointed at him in front of 1,000,000,000,000 watching eyes. He closed his notebook. He put his pen in his pocket. He stood up. The hall slowly, gradually, painfully fell quiet again as every eye turned to him. Suitors who could crush him with one hand stared at him with hatred. Ambassadors who controlled entire star systems looked at him with confusion. Guards with weapons that could turn him to dust watched his every step. Dawin walked forward. He did not rush. He did not hesitate. He walked at the same steady, even pace he used when walking through the embassy hallways back home. He kept his eyes forward, his hands at his sides, and his face calm. When he reached the center of the hall, he stopped. He stood before the princess, the emperor, and the entire galaxy. Yuna looked down at him from the raised platform. For the first time since the selection began, her eyes were not cold, or bored, or distant. They were warm. "Do you accept?" she asked. Dawin looked at her. He looked at the furious emperor. He looked at the line of suitors who wanted him dead. He looked at the cameras that were broadcasting his face to 1,000,000,000,000 screens. Then he looked back at Yuna. "I don't understand why you chose me," he said honestly. "But I won't pretend I have the right to refuse a question that took this much courage to ask." The crystals on the walls slowly, gently turned gold. The alien princess denied all suitors, then pointed at a silent human. Part 2. The One Who Did Not Bow. That night, the Valari Palace did not sleep. The hallways buzzed with whispered conversations, secret deals, and last-minute plans. Suitors who had already been rejected tried to buy their way back into the selection. Ambassadors argued with palace officials. Servants moved through the corridors like shadows, carrying messages and gifts meant to reach the princess before morning. None of them reached her. Yuna sat alone in her private garden, high above the palace grounds. The garden floated on a platform of anti-gravity stone, surrounded by nothing but open sky and the soft glow of 3 moons. The air was cool, and the flowers around her, tall, silver-petaled things that grew only on the Valari homeworld, swayed gently, without any wind, as if they were breathing. She was tired, not the kind of tired that sleep could fix, but a deeper kind. The kind that came from years of being surrounded by people who only wanted something from her. Every suitor who had stood before her that day had looked at her and seen the same thing. A throne, an empire, a weapon to be claimed. Not one of them had looked at her and simply seen a person. Not one of them had spoken to her without hunger in their eyes. She pulled her knees to her chest and rested her chin on them, staring out at the dark sky. "Lady Sujin," she said quietly. A figure stepped out from behind a row of silver flowers. Lady Sujin was Yuna's personal advisor and the closest thing she had to a friend. She was older, sharp-faced, and carried herself with the careful grace of someone who had survived decades of palace politics. Her glowing eyes were a darker shade than Yuna's, amber instead of pale silver. "Yes, Princess?" "The observers in the far corner of the hall, the ones from the minor species. Tell me about them." Sujin raised an eyebrow. "They are nobody, Princess. Low-ranking diplomats sent to watch. A formality, nothing more." "There was a human among them," Yuna said, "sitting at the far table, writing in a notebook." Sujin thought for a moment. "Yes, a translator from the Earth Embassy. His name is—" She paused and pulled a thin data screen from her sleeve, scrolling through records. "Dowan. Rank, junior translator. No military record. No political connections. No family of importance." She lowered the screen. "He is no one." Yuna was quiet for a long time. "He never looked at me," she said. Sujin blinked. "I'm sorry?" "Every being in that hall looked at me. The suitors, the guards, the servants, even the observers in the back. They all stared, but the human never did, not once in 3 days." "Perhaps he was simply not paying attention." "No," Yuna said. "He was paying close attention. He was writing, recording, translating. He was doing his work. He simply did not care about me." Sujin did not understand why the princess was smiling as she said this. The next morning, the great hall was even more crowded than before. Word had spread across the galaxy that the Valari princess had rejected everyone, and now even more suitors had arrived, hoping to be the one to change her mind. The line stretched out of the palace, down the crystal steps, and into the city below. Emperor Tejo sat on his throne and watched the chaos with a tight jaw. He had not slept well. His advisors had spent the night warning him that this public rejection of so many powerful leaders could lead to political disaster. Some of the rejected suitors controlled large military fleets. If enough of them felt insulted, the Valari Empire could face a war on multiple fronts. Yuna entered the hall and took her seat. The crystals on the walls turned a cool, calm blue. She looked exactly as she had the day before, composed, distant, and utterly unbothered. The new suitors were even louder and more dramatic than the ones before. One arrived in a floating chariot made of pure energy. Another brought an entire orchestra of alien musicians who played a song composed specifically for the princess. A third walked in with a living creature on a chain, a rare beast from a dying world, its fur shimmering with every color imaginable. Yuna rejected them all. No, no, no. The word fell like a blade over and over, cutting through speeches and gifts and promises without mercy. But between each rejection, her eyes moved to the far corner of the hall. Dowan was there again. Same table, same chair, same gray uniform. His notebook was open, and his pen moved steadily across the page. He had a cup of something warm beside him. Tea, probably, brought from the Earth Embassy. He sipped it quietly, between notes. At one point, a fight broke out between 2 rejected suitors near the center of the hall. Guards rushed in to separate them, and the crowd surged backward. In the confusion, a large armored figure stumbled into Dowan's table, knocking his tea to the floor. Dowan looked at the spilled tea. He looked at the armored figure. He said nothing. He simply picked up his cup, wiped the table with his sleeve, and went back to writing. Yuna watched the whole thing. She saw how he didn't flinch, didn't react with anger or fear, didn't try to make himself seen or heard. He just cleaned up the mess and continued with his work. Something shifted in her chest, a feeling she could not name. Later that afternoon, during a brief pause in the selection, Yuna stood from her throne and walked down the steps. The crowd parted before her, in silence. She moved through the hall slowly, looking at no one, until she reached the far corner. She stopped in front of Dowen's table. Dowen looked up. His eyes met hers for the first time. He did not gasp or bow or stumble over his words. He simply looked at her, calmly, quietly, the way one person looks at another. "You are the translator from Earth," Yuna said. "Yes," Dowen replied. "You have been here for 3 days. 4, actually. I arrived a day early to set up." A faint smile touched her lips. "And in 4 days you have not once looked at me." Dowen hesitated. Then he said, "It wasn't my place to look, Princess. I'm here to do a job." The hall had gone completely silent. Every suitor, every ambassador, every guard and servant was watching. The crystals on the walls turned a shade that no one in the room had ever seen before. A soft, warm gold. Yuna looked at Dowen for a long moment. Then she turned and walked back to her throne without another word. Dowen watched her go. Then he picked up his pen, looked down at his notebook, and realized his hand was shaking. He took a breath, steadied himself, and kept writing. But somewhere deep inside, in a place he had kept locked for a very long time, something had opened. And he knew, with a quiet certainty that frightened him, that it would not close again. The alien princess denied all suitors, then pointed at a silent human. Part 1. The Grand Selection. The great hall of the Valari Palace stretched wider than any building ever built by human hands. Its walls were made of living crystal that changed color with the mood of whoever sat on the throne. Today, the crystals burned a deep, angry red because Princess Yuna was not happy. She sat on her smaller throne beside her father, Emperor Tejo, and looked down at the long line of suitors that curved through the hall and out through the massive golden doors. There were hundreds of them. Princes, warlords, commanders, diplomats, and wealthy lords from every known corner of the galaxy had traveled to the Valari homeworld for one reason: to win the hand of the most powerful princess in the known universe. Yuna was not just beautiful. Among the Valari, beauty was common. Every one of her kind had silver-white skin, tall and graceful bodies, and eyes that glowed like soft lanterns in the dark. What made Yuna different was her mind. She had studied war, politics, science, and language since she was a child. She spoke 47 galactic languages. She had led a fleet into battle at the age of 19, and won. She was the only heir to an empire that controlled over 300 star systems. And she was deeply, completely bored. The first suitor stepped forward. He was a Drathian warlord, 8 feet tall, covered in thick green scales, with 4 arms and a voice like grinding metal. He dropped the chest at the foot of her throne. When it opened, it revealed the glowing core of a dead star, captured and contained in a magnetic shell. It was worth more than most planets. Yuna looked at it the way someone might look at a stone on the road. "No," she said. The warlord's eyes went wide. He tried to speak, but Yuna had already looked away. The guard stepped forward and guided him out. The crystals on the walls flickered with a brief shade of amusement. The next suitor was a prince from the Horan Federation. He was tall and handsome by the standards of his people, with deep blue skin and golden hair that floated around his head like a halo. He did not bring a gift. Instead, he dropped to one knee and gave a speech about love, destiny, and the joining of two great empires. Yuna let him finish. She waited a polite 2 seconds. "No," she said, and so it went. One by one, the greatest and most powerful beings in the galaxy stepped before her throne, and one by one, she sent them away. Some offered wealth, some offered armies, some offered poetry, music, or technology that could reshape worlds. A few even threatened her, suggesting that refusing them would mean war. Yuna met those threats with a look so cold that even her father shifted uncomfortably on his throne. Emperor Tejo was not a patient man. He had ruled the Valari Empire for over 60 years, and he had never once failed to get what he wanted. But his daughter was the one force in the universe he could not control. He leaned toward her between suitors and spoke in a low voice. "You must choose someone, Yuna. This is not a game. The Empire needs an alliance." "The Empire needs strength," Yuna replied without looking at him. "I see no strength here, only noise." Tejo pressed his lips together and said nothing more. In the far corner of the great hall, away from the lights and the noise and the long line of hopeful suitors, a small table had been set up for the diplomatic observers. Representatives from minor species were allowed to watch the selection as a gesture of goodwill, though no one truly cared about their presence. At that table sat a human. His name was Dowan. He was 31 years old, average height, with dark hair and calm, quiet eyes. He wore the simple gray uniform of Earth's Galactic Embassy, and on the table before him was a small recording device and a notebook. He was a translator, one of the lowest ranks in the diplomatic service. His job was to watch, listen, and write reports that most people would never read. Dowan did not look at the princess. He did not look at the suitors. He kept his eyes on his work, writing careful notes in small, neat handwriting. When a suitor shouted in a language he recognized, he translated the words quietly into his recorder. When the crowd roared with laughter or gasped in shock, he simply waited for the noise to pass and then continued writing. He had been doing this for 3 days. Around him, the other minor species observers whispered and pointed, and made bets on who the princess would choose. A small lizard-like diplomat from the Tessic Union nudged Dowan and asked him who he thought would win. Dowan looked up briefly. "I don't think anyone will," he said. Then he went back to his notes. The lizard diplomat laughed and called him boring. By the end of the 3rd day, Yuna had rejected every single suitor. The great hall was filled with the sound of angry voices. Several ambassadors filed formal complaints. 2 warlords challenged each other to duels over imagined insults. A trade prince threw his gift on the ground and stormed out, swearing that the Valari would regret this. Through all of this, the crystals on the walls shifted through shades of red, orange, and deep purple, reflecting the chaos and frustration that filled the room. Emperor Tejo stood and raised his hand. The hall fell silent. "The selection will continue tomorrow," he announced. "My daughter will make her choice on the final day. This is my word." He looked at Yuna as he said it. There was no warmth in his eyes. It was a command, not a request. Yuna said nothing. She simply stood, turned, and walked out of the hall through a side door. Her long silver gown trailed behind her like liquid metal, and the crystals near her shifted to a pale, icy blue. As the crowd began to leave, Dowan quietly packed up his things. He placed his notebook in his bag, turned off his recorder. For just a moment, he looked up at the empty throne where the princess had been sitting. Then he put his bag over his shoulder and walked out into the cold night air of an alien world, alone. He did not know that in less than 24 hours, his entire life would change forever.